story of Brett Ryan. Brett was raised in a successful and large Canadian family. His parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. They tried to impart lessons to him through their own actions. Bill had a respected position at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and enjoyed various hobbies such as sports, yoga, and psychology. Similarly, Susan was extremely diligent. She carried the weight of the household, balancing time between her husband and children, while also managing their large home in one of Toronto's most prestigious neighborhoods, without any outside help. Like his older brothers, Brett attended university after high school, always striving to outdo them. To earn extra money, he advertised painting services for Toronto homeowners' houses and fences in a local newspaper. First, things went smoothly. Brett earned his first income, and Susan was proud, often using him as an example to others. However, making money through a part-time job was one thing, but dropping out of university to spend all his time inhaling paint fumes without a proper education was another. After some time in university, Brett decided to leave. For the first couple of years after this decision, Brett still felt confident compared to his older brothers. After a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their fields, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher started working for the City of Toronto Transit Commission and Leland, the family artist and designer. Following their studies, they moved out of their parents' home. Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett grew more desperate due to his mounting debts and his inability to pay them off. He developed depression. By February 7th, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had ballooned past $60,000. Although Brett was considered an intelligent individual, he did know how to effectively use his mind. He always put on a cheerful face and helped everyone around him. He was a participant in volunteer initiatives. Consequently, no one could fathom the depth of despair within him. Eventually, a fateful moment arrived when nothing could be done. On October 28, 2007, had no work orders for house painting or any other tasks around the house. Orders were always scarce in the fall since everyone typically painted their houses in spring or summer. With winter approaching and no prospects for earnings, there was no time to wait. Brett donned all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a scarf knitted by his mother. This particular scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't worn it before, but now found it useful. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank located on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching some thick folder, Brett waited for his turn at the bank. When an employee finally summoned him, he approached her and quietly informed her that he had a gun with him. He instructed her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. The girl, shaken with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett then quietly exited the building to avoid drawing the attention of the guards. Once outside, he ran. Upon counting the stolen money, he realized it amounted to just over $1,000. This sum was far from sufficient to clear his debts. He calculated that robbing about 60 banks would be necessary to meet his financial obligations. Despite how improbable that seemed, Brett saw no alternative. In the initial days following the robbery, Brett was consumed with fear that the police might track him down. To avoid detection, he refrained from going home and informed his mother that he had a job in a neighboring town. Instead, he spent nights in his car, cautiously approaching his house periodically to check if any police cars were hidden nearby. Each visit confirmed silence and no signs of pursuit. This reassured Brett that his plan was working. The success of the first robbery led to more, a second, a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett took precautions to change his appearance by wearing different clothes purchased secondhand or even retrieved from trash and burning them afterward. He also invested in a fake beard from a costume store since bank employees always mentioned his beard in their testimonies. News outlets in Toronto began covering stories about the bearded robber. But despite this notoriety, he never managed to gain substantial amounts through these crimes, the most being just $3,000 per robbery. Brett's hit a snag when police identified his vehicle on surveillance cameras and traced it back to his residence. Lacking solid evidence for an arrest, law enforcement decided simply to monitor him closely. For about 15 days following this new development, Brett refrained from further robberies, even though no more than 3 or 4 days typically passed between crimes before this. His unusual hiatus led some officers to believe they were tailing an innocent person and wasting resources on a dead end. But then fortune turned in favor of law enforcement. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later exited not far from the bank. Wearing a different and unusual outfit, he entered the branch and remained there for some time. Upon leaving, he was immediately apprehended by the police, who announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett had been under investigation for 7 months and was charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always entered the bank unarmed. He did not even carry a kitchen knife. In total, Brett faced 19 charges and was subsequently imprisoned. Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which led to only 8 of the 19 counts being upheld. However, Brett didn't stop there. At the first opportunity to apply for parole, he submitted a petition. In it, he requested consideration of his severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and substantial debt. Additionally, he emphasized that he committed these crimes without intending to harm anyone and without carrying any weapons. His remarks were taken. However, to secure early release from prison, he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist. These sessions had a positive impact on Brett's behavior and mindset while incarcerated. During this period, he did not communicate with his family, but eventually took steps to mend those relationships. The positive changes in Brett were recognized by the commissioners overseeing his case. Consequently, on November 24, 2010, was released from prison. Nonetheless, this hard-won freedom turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. Before becoming known as Brett the Bank Robber, he was simply a painter burdened with personal struggles. Post-incarceration life proved difficult. Few companies were willing to hire an ex-convict with such a tainted background. Even when hired for house painting services, clients would cancel upon recognizing him as the infamous bearded robber. The social repercussions extended to his family as well. Neighbors who once praised Susan's garden began spreading unpleasant rumors about them. The Ryan family decided to sell their house hastily and move to Scarborough, where Susan started cultivating her new garden afresh. Despite these challenges, Brett managed to find employment at a trading company. However, his salary was modest. His parents also assisted financially in helping him rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist. Each session, the specialist advised him not to sever ties with his family. The psychologist's advice proved effective. However, Brett's financial situation remained precarious. Then, in September 2011, a significant positive event occurred in his life. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an exceptional girl. She owned an apartment with windows that offered stunning view of the sea, which provided the young couple with a picturesque landscape to enjoy. She was also athletic, maintaining excellent physical condition. Crucially, she was unconcerned about Brett's past. As a couple, they traveled periodically and had even visited Australia. Brett's parents were delighted to observe his relationship with Kristen flourish. They were confident that Kristen would encourage him to advance in life and secure his place in society. Life seemed to improve for Brett until his father passed away. This loss profoundly affected him and triggered a return of depressive symptoms. Consequently, he had to increase his visits to the psychologist and spend time supporting his mother, both emotionally and financially, despite his limited resources. Realizing that their relationship needed to advance beyond casual dating, given their maturity, Brett decided to make a commitment to Kristen. He had saved some money and discussed his intentions with his mother. He expressed his desire to propose to Kristen, the goal being a memorable proposal she couldn't refuse. Understanding her son's intention, Susan provided additional funds for him to purchase an engagement ring. Notably, the couple had previously discussed their future together, and it was clear that Kristen did not require an extravagant gift or similar symbols of commitment. Brett's proposal to Kristen meant the world to her, signaling his serious intentions. Despite this, He decided to go the extra mile and purchased a gold ring adorned with a sizable diamond for his beloved. Naturally, Kristen accepted his proposal. From there, they began planning their wedding. Brett, with all of Kristen's decisions, nodding in approval. However, the rising costs and financial implications unsettled him. He started worrying about his career prospects and financial stability. Determined to secure a stable job, Brett found an engineering position at a prominent tech company online. He meticulously prepared his resume and applied for the job. To his delight, he was invited for an interview and subsequently received a job offer. Elated by the news, Brett shared it with Kristen and his mother. Eager to make a good impression at his new job, he asked his mother for money to purchase an expensive suit. As always, she didn't refuse him. Yet, just when everything seemed perfect, Brett received a disappointing call from the company. Their security team had uncovered details of his criminal past, leading them to rescind their offer. This news hit Brett hard. It was like a bolt from the blue. His spirits dropped immediately. Frustration set in as he considered the futility of ongoing interviews, each ending in rejection due to his past. Faced with repeated setbacks, Brett decided that rather than continuing with futile efforts and investing time in studies that seemed pointless due to his tarnished record, he would use the funds allocated for university studies on their wedding instead. Brett thus found himself back where he had recently escaped from, but kept certain truths hidden from loved ones, including dropping out of university and being rejected from the engineering role. He maintained appearances by dressing in professional attire each morning before heading to paint houses, changing clothes en route. To further sustain this facade among friends and family, Brett frequently updated social media profiles with pictures seemingly originating from an office environment or business events, images sourced off the internet, and would even pretend he's resolving urgent work-related matters during family gatherings by faking phone calls regarding work issues. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett sought to plan a wedding. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to conceal his true situation, successfully creating the illusion of a stable life. Despite being a common painter, he projected an image of success and prosperity. Brett agreed to rent an expensive restaurant, requiring $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled seeing Brett's apparent transformation. A prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and an attractive bride. However, the truth of Brett's deceit was far more complex. With the wedding just a month away, Brett needed funds for the event. He repeatedly borrowed money from his mother until she could no longer assist him financially. Desperate, he even demanded that she seek higher-paying employment. Planning his party for August 0, he invited all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, Brett confided in his counselor about his deceptions. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer at a technology company. The psychologist expressed deep disappointment and advised Brett to come clean to his mother. Though reluctant, Brett eventually told his mother the truth. Her devastation was profound. She had spent years boasting about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett also confess everything to Kristen, or she would do it herself. His brothers were already aware of the lies and supported their mother's stance. Unable to face telling Kristen the truth himself, a shocking task after barely managing to reveal it to his mother, Brett found himself in an untenable position as the wedding approached. He knew that informing Kristen would prevent the ceremony and considered if honesty might have been better. Facing pressure from all sides, Brett still couldn't admit the truth to Kristen and feared his mother might do so before long. Each time Kristen's phone rang, he tensed up until realizing it was not her discovering the secret, but rather another friend discussing wedding plans. Desperate for resolution and unable to handle the mounting stress any longer, he needed a final solution. He was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. Besides, it's quite a silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was bow shooting in the at targets. He taught Brett how to, was good at target shooting, though it was unlikely his late father thought his son would that skill in such manner. Brett bought crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris lying in Susan's garage. At home, He arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From an outsider's perspective, it must have seemed like Brett had spent all day at home watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, dressed in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. His aim was to eliminate anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, began once again to persuade her, and even demand, that she not tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then Brett began to get angry. Susan sensed something wrong seeing her son's mad eyes, and warned him that she had already called Christopher, and he was on his way. Brett went berserk. He ran to the garage to get a crossbow, but found that his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun and finally ensured she was dead by tightening a rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived and started calling for their mother or brother, but received no response. Only an arrow shot from behind which pierced his neck, causing him to die within minutes. The next victim was Alexander, their youngest brother. As it turns out, Susan had managed to call him too before everything happened. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not penetrate deeply or it missed vital arteries. Thus, Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. During this time, Leland was in the house sleeping in his room on the 2nd. He had no idea of the carnage occurring in the garage and garden, much less that his own brother was committing the crime. Leland's sleep was disturbed by a scream. Coming downstairs, he saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett. As soon as Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Brett aside, he ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized this was the moment he had completely ruined his life. With nothing else to do, he took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they saw a bloody Brett sitting next to his equally bloody, but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he confessed everything. Brett also informed them that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At both the police station and later at trial, Brett admitted that he did not intend to kill Susan. His plan was merely to scare her. However, he did plan to kill Christopher and Alexander that day since they were witnesses. And if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Almost 10 years ago, he tried justifying everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. Despite acknowledging that Brett confessed everything on his own accord and did not hinder the investigation in any way, the judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, 1 for each murder, with parole eligibility in 2041. As for Leland, he is not speaking to reporters, but is known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that dreadful incident. The case of Katrina Vetrano. The story of Katrina Vetrano is both horrifying and baffling. Firstly, nothing seemed amiss on the day of the fateful event. The attack occurred in broad daylight in a fairly populated area. Secondly, her death has critical aspects to it. Thirdly, the investigation and sentencing of the perpetrator raised many questions. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, arranged to meet her father after work to spend time together. Since Miss Vetrano had moved away, family gatherings had become rare because everyone was busy with their own matters. In addition to her commitments, she was balancing 2 jobs. Philip picked up his daughter and took her home. There, the family shared their impressions of the past week. When Katrina was about to leave, she asked if her father wanted to go jogging with her, as they often did, covering several miles together. Her father replied that he couldn't this time, due to severe back pain that nothing seemed to alleviate. Perhaps he needed a new prescription, or maybe it was just the change in weather. Mr. Vetrano offered to call a cab for Katrina due to his discomfort and inability to join her run. However, the weather was beautiful, the heat had abated, and there was a fresh scent in the air, hence Katrina declined his offer. She was training for the upcoming marathon. The young woman had recently broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to distract herself. A jog would clearly do her good. That evening was the last time her parents saw their youngest daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left the house for a jog. Her first stop was Spring Creek Park, a cozy and tranquil place buried in greenery, a true paradise amongst the city's infrastructure. However, only part of the park was available for walking. The rest was covered with thickets and swamps. Mr. Vetrano asked his daughter to stick to her usual route and stay away from unfamiliar paths and people. Unfortunately, Katrina ignored his advice in search of solitude. She decided to go to a grassy, deserted place. Katrina's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. She felt a sharp pain in the back of her head and fell down. This rash decision cost the young woman her life. A frightening uncertainty entered the Vetrano home. It had been 2 hours since they had said goodbye to their youngest daughter. She should have been home by now, or at least answering the calls of her parents, who were frantically trying to reach her. And she had promised to keep her cell phone with herself. The anxiety was growing. Her father sensed that something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, the chief of the New York City Police Department. They were on good terms, and the high-ranking official knew that Philip would not make a fuss over nothing. After that, Katrina Vetrano was reported missing. Police began searching for the young woman, combing the park area and surrounding streets. As a result, experienced canine units were brought in. Since it is known the first 24 hours after the sussery, the disappearance of a person are crucial. Law enforcement utilized all available resources before nightfall. At the same time, Mr. Vetrano, along with a group of volunteers, searched for his daughter on his own. He scoured the park from end to end, combing paths and wading through tall grass, all while making phone calls. As dusk fell, he noticed a light in the grass. As he approached, he recognized Katrina's phone. Maybe she lost it and just didn't let them know? Philip approached, headed toward police officers, deciding to continue picking his way through the thicket, stepping into the grass. As he ventured further, Philip stumbled upon something soft, a partially undressed female body lying face down. When he turned it over, a familiar face stared back at him. A desperate scream escaped from his father's chest. It was Katrina. She hadn't simply lost her phone as he had initially believed. His little girl didn't answering her phone because life had been cruelly taken from her. The crushing realization of what had transpired overwhelmed Mr. Vetrano. The police, hearing the screaming and yelling, quickly rushed to him. They dragged Philip away from his daughter's body, explaining that it was now a crime scene. They emphasized that anything in the vicinity could be considered evidence and implored him not to touch anything to prevent tampering. On the journey home, Mr. Vetrano was lost in thought, tormented by how to break the news of their daughter's death to his wife. Images of past memories flooded his mind. He recalled vividly how on July 12, 1986, in Queens, their second daughter was born. From an early age, Philip had been proud of Katrina. She was obedient and well-mannered. He remembered taking her to school for the first time and how excellently she performed academically. Her strong educational foundation enabled her to earn advanced degrees. Katrina graduated from St. John's University with a master's in speech pathology. She always dreamed of aiding children and worked tirelessly with autistic kids. Katrina loved traveling and writing and had a passion for sports, especially running, an interest she shared with Philip, which brought them closer together. He recalled how closely he scrutinized her suitors out of paternal jealousy. Eager for her to find true love and eventually establish a strong family like his own with Kathy, he hoped for wonderful grandchildren. The return journey felt endless. As they approached the house, Mr. Vetrano paused at the entrance and took a deep breath. Fortunately, he didn't need to explain anything to her. She understood everything from her husband's face. Kathy cried, approached her husband, and hugged him. Soon Karina's relatives and friends learned of the incident. They struggled to recover from the shock. Believing in the sudden death of the young woman was hard, let alone its violent nature. Miss Vetrano had been subjected to a brutal attack. This was the conclusion reached by investigators. At first glance, it was obvious that the woman had resisted. Even in death, her fists remained clenched. Bruises and abrasions were found on her once young and healthy body, and her athletic clothing was torn. The autopsy showed that the back of the victim's skull had been damaged by a blunt object, probably a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A clear mark was visible on the woman's neck. The forensic examination also revealed the intimate nature of the crime violence. The experts' findings confirmed the police's initial suspicions. Earth and grass were found under the victim's fingernails, probably in an attempt to free herself from her attacker's grip and escape. Specialists examined her mouth and found teeth knocked out and cracked in places. She had clearly bitten to defend herself. Even the woman's neck was covered with numerous scratches. She was grabbing with her hands, trying to force her attacker to let go of her. Shortly after this tragedy, new information leaked to the media from Princeton, Massachusetts. Another jogger's body was found among tall grass. The woman had apparently also been out for a walk in a secluded place and suffered a similar fate. At first glance, these cases seemed identical, raising questions about another potential serial offender. In the United States, geneticists took charge of the case, tasked with comparing DNA samples collected from the crime scenes. Fortunately, unidentified samples were found on both victims. Contrary to police expectations, the analysis showed no connection between the crimes. It turned out that the DNA samples belonged to different individuals. It's well known that most lethal crimes are committed by someone close to the victim. Thus, police couldn't ignore any possibility. To this end, the victim's father provided his DNA since he was first to discover his daughter's body. Later on, all of her relatives also underwent a DNA test which yielded no matches. Detectives then decided to interview Karina's family and friends to find out if she had any enemies or ill wishes. Turned out there were none. She was respected and loved by everyone. Investigators developed a new theory. Someone acted on base motives upon meeting Karina in a secluded place and attacked her. Feeling stuck, they sought public help by offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to the perpetrator. The initiative received widespread response. Detectives explored some 250 leads, conducted 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 2,700 reports, all to no avail. It seemed like the perpetrator hadn't committed crimes before, or at least hadn't been caught for them, complicating things further. On August 31, 2016, a utility worker approached the police station with significant information at the time of Miss Vetrano's death. He found himself in a restricted area of the park one day. Suddenly, a man emerged from the bushes and took off running in a northerly direction. Because of his testimony, the New York Police Department created and distributed a sketch of the suspect in December 2016. However, they considered that the person shown in the sketch might have just been a passerby caught at the wrong place and time. Unfortunately, releasing this sketch didn't provide any new leads, and the investigation fell into another long stalemate. On December 4, 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined in to help solve Karina Vetrano's case. At first, they developed a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, this individual was very familiar with the area, especially the park where everything occurred, suggesting he might live or continue to live nearby. Fearing capture now, he seems to avoid that area. It was evident he knew that the quiet and partially overgrown territory was perfect for hiding his actions. Based on this idea, police conducted screenings among local African American men. However, this didn't bring about any breakthroughs. Let's take a look about Chanel Lewis. Chanel Lewis's life didn't stand out much from other young African American individuals. He lived in one of Brooklyn's low-income housing complexes, approximately 4 or 5 miles from Spring Creek Park. Chanel was unemployed and living with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. One detail setting him apart was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Yet this did not stop him from graduating from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. Former classmates remembered Chanel as a quiet loner who constantly faced bullying. One shared that even girls intimidated and punched him. He had no friends. Another peer noted that while Louis sometimes fought back, he wasn't effective at it and often got ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel always wore a hoodie and would smirk and walk away when things got tough, earning him the unfortunate nickname, African Lizard. 17-year-old Danielle Munz, a fellow student, described Chanel as a bright student with good grades. He liked to show me funny videos on the bus, she recalled. I never saw him being cruel. Some sources reported that the young man once claimed he wanted to harm all the girls during his time in middle school, even posing the question, what happens if I bring a knife to school? Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of the school to which Chanel was transferred, commented on this. We received no reports of threats in middle school. During his time at our school, he had no disciplinary sanctions. I never heard him make threatening statements towards other students. Nonetheless, Chanel was a troubled teenager who often experienced bullying. He dreamed of working in social services, aspiring to help those in distress. When conflicts arose at home, he would wander the streets frequently and visit the park. Louis had several minor encounters with the police, 2 for violations in Spring Creek and 1 for urinating in public in May 2016. Another incident happened when a local merchant reported Louis for loitering in his store with a crowbar. Responding officers checked Chanel's ID and released him, as he had no prior incidents. However, this information was retained by the police and later played a crucial role in the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death. In February 2017, who was involved in the investigation, remembered something significant. He had repeatedly seen a young man in a hoodie wandering around the park. Russo even attempted to follow him once. Intrigued by his behavior, the young man walked slowly and stopped for long periods in front of houses near the park, as if scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Russo lost sight of him when he contacted his colleagues by phone. Following a store owner's report of suspicious activity, a teenager matching Chanel's description came to the police's attention 2 months into the investigation. Detective Russo recalled this wanderer, thinking he might have seen or heard something relevant. Investigators then focused on Chanel Louis, after Detective Russo took a closer look at his file. Chanel's peculiarities had raised their interest. The police began inquiries about him, questioning acquaintances and teachers. It emerged that he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news stirred significant concern and suspicion. With no other leads, officers decided to focus on Louis. It was discovered that during Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, his clothes torn, and he had visible bruises and abrasions. When his mother inquired about what had happened, Louis claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, mostly cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. However, they noted similarities between events involving Chanel Louis and Karina Vetrano. On February 4, 2017, was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DNA for analysis. Detectives wondered if a perpetrator would willingly do this. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5th. Admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, listening to music, not through thickets. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, Chanel nodded and quietly said yes. I was walking in the park trying to distract myself from a family argument when I met a woman alone. He began again. I decided to follow her. When she passed by me, I grabbed her shoulders and threw her to the ground, then hit her face about 5 times so she couldn't scream. He recalled how his punches knocked out several of her teeth, injuring his own hand in the process, echoing details eerily consistent with earlier evidence they had gathered. He also mentioned that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes. Miss Atrano fiercely resisted by biting. To avoid drawing attention, Lewis dragged her off the path into Tall, where he tried to undress and assault her. She was horrified, but kept resisting. Chanel then strangled her until he realized she was no longer alive. When asked if he knew the victim beforehand, he replied, "I did not know her before this. It all happened by chance." The motive for the act was unexpected and bizarre. Loud music played by a neighborhood gang member for hours had triggered Chanel's hatred and uncontrollable aggression. These negative emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman. A strange reason indeed. Investigators' confusion faded when DNA comparison results matched perfectly. Microscopic traces found on the victim's body and phone belonged to Chanel. Consequently, the police and prosecutor concluded the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed unlikely. It's possible Chanel had noticed Corina before, since he often went to that park. He might have seen her with her father, liked her, and decided to approach her. After being rejected, he became furious and attacked her, causing the situation to spiral out of control. This scenario would have been more understandable. On November 5, 2018, the trial against Chanel Lewis began. Despite his previous statements to authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty, a stance echoed by his family denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, facing him with a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis's guilt not only unfolded in the courtroom, but also spilled over into the media. Lewis's defense team stirred things up by pointing out alleged legal violations during his arrest. Along with several news outlets, they claimed racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these allegations as baseless, emphasizing that the investigation complied with legal standards. The prosecution presented tangible evidence and DNA analysis findings, while the defense argued that this evidence was insufficient and contaminated due to many people at the crime scene, including Corina's father, who discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Rosano stated that odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also introduced Lewis's phone records, revealing his internet searches on second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, which raised questions about what sin Chanel hoped to atone for. The release of Lewis's confession video sparked further controversy. His lawyers argued he was under immense pressure, leading to a coerced confession. They suspected police might have fabricated evidence. The recording commenced only after Lewis was pressured, raising concerns that the search of his home violated protocols. The defense suggested that the investigation into Katrina McVey's death was initially mishandled. With public pressure mounting for an arrest, they argued Lewis became a scapegoat. The jury was deeply influenced by the defense's compelling arguments. After considering both sides, jurors could not reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial. A retrial was initially scheduled for Jan. 22, 2019, but later postponed to March 2019. Following 5 hours of deliberation during the retrial, Chanel Lewis was ultimately found guilty of Katrina McVey's death and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. The defense employed delay tactics by citing an anonymous source to allege misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and conspiracy. A case that seemed straightforward at first sparked widespread prejudices and fears in society. Katrina McVey's tragic death affected many, serving as a stark reminder for women to remain vigilant about their safety. Terry Pettit was a bit of a rebel. She held strong opinions and often dragged her friends into trouble in the name of adventure. She rolled her own cigarettes, drank whiskey, and took pride in defying the traditional expectations of what a woman should be. She was also highly intelligent, finishing high school at 16 before enrolling at the University of Alberta. After spending a year studying engineering, Terry switched her focus to the arts. She worked for the college paper, where she met the man who would become her husband, Ron Yakimchuk. Ron, the eldest of 6 children, grew up on a farm outside of Andrew, Alberta. Unlike Terry, Ron was laid back and down to earth, with a keen intellect and a strong set of progressive beliefs. Terry eventually decided to leave school and took a job as a proofreader at the Edmonton Journal. Though she didn't have a college degree, she worked her way up and became a reporter. After completing his studies, Ron became a teacher. In 1973, the couple set off on a cross-country adventure. They had plans to attend a wedding in Montreal but decided to continue driving east, hoping to find new jobs somewhere along the maritime region of Canada's east coast. The wedding was scheduled for June 16th. On June 9th, the couple loaded up their maroon 1959 Volkswagen Bug, strapped a canoe to its top, and began their journey across the country. They stopped to visit friends in Brandon, Manitoba along the way. They mailed a postcard with just the word Naya written on it to a friend back in Edmonton from Dryden, Ontario. It is believed that the message was meant to tease the friend, who did not believe that couple's beat-up car would make it as far as Ontario that quickly. He had bet Terry $50 that they would not make it that far that fast, and the postcard was presumably meant to be proof that they had succeeded so that she could collect on the bet. This postcard will be the last anyone ever heard of Terry and Ron. The couple never arrived at the wedding, and neither they nor their car has ever been located. Their bank accounts have remained untouched. The two seemed to vanish into thin air somewhere between Dryden and Montreal. There were few leads to follow early in the investigation because authorities were not even sure where the couple had gone missing. In November 2007, the Edmonton Journal, Terry's old employer, ran a story about the case and a new witness came forward. Vivian McCrory claims that she saw the couple, along with another unknown man, broken down on the side of Highway 69 just outside of Prairie Sound, Ontario in July of 1973. She says she remembered the maroon Volkswagen with an Alberta license plate after all that time had passed because her husband had to slam on his brakes and swerve to avoid hitting it as it was still partially in the southbound lane. According to Vivian, the hood of the car was up as though someone was working on the engine. A small blonde woman and a man about the same height as her were standing by the front of the car, and another man was standing closer to the ditch on the side of the road. She initially thought the man and the woman by the car were the couple because they were standing so close to each other. However, Ron was significantly taller than his wife. It is possible then that this unknown man was standing so close to Terry because he was trying to intimidate her. None of the three people at the scene so much as acknowledged the McCrory's car as it narrowly avoided hitting them. Vivian says she called the police to tell them about the stalled vehicle, but they did not seem interested in the report. The major problem with Vivian's account is the timing. She is positive that she saw the car in July because she and her husband had waited to make their own cross-country drive until after the end of Klondike Days. Klondike Days, which today are known as K-Days, are a 10-day exhibition in Edmonton that takes place every year. They always end on the last Sunday in July. If it were Terry and Ron that Vivian saw, that means that their plans had somehow drastically changed and they had been driving around Ontario for over a month. Terry's parents have both passed away. Her brother Gordon says that the rest of the Petit family has accepted the fact that Ron and Terry are both dead and are trying to move on past their loss. The Yakimchuk family, however, still hopes that they will someday find out exactly what happened to the couple. Ron's father hopes to one day win the lottery, not so that he can live a luxurious life, but so that he can hire a private detective to solve the case. Bonnie Bickwit, 15, and Mitchell Weiser, 16, were in love but separated in the summer of 1973. Mitchell was spending the summer working as a photographer's assistant in Brooklyn, where he and Bonnie lived with their families, while Bonnie was working as a mother's helper at Camp Wellnet, a Jewish camp 90 miles outside of New York City. That July, Mitchell was planning to attend Summer Jam, a massive outdoor concert festival headlined by the Allman Brothers and the Grateful Dead that was being held in Watkins Glen, New York. He and his friend Larry purchased tickets with plans to travel to the concert together, but at the last minute, Larry's mother refused to allow him to go. Rather than waste the ticket, Mitchell decided that he would pick up Bonnie at camp and go with her instead. On July 26th, Mitchell picked up Larry's ticket from him and told him that he would see him the following Monday. He then traveled by bus and by cab to Camp Walnut, which was just outside of Narrowsburg, New York. He used up almost all of the $25 he had left home with in making this part of the trip. When Mitchell arrived at the camp on July 27th, he and Bonnie had breakfast at the camp's dining hall. Bonnie asked for time off from work to attend the concert. When her request was denied, she quit her job. While this action sounds harsh, Bonnie had not been happy with her job all summer. She told her supervisor that she would be back on Monday to collect her belongings and her final paycheck. Her supervisor then let the 15-year-old simply leave the camp property. Neighbors had seen Bonnie sneak into her home in Brooklyn the week before Mitchell came to pick her up. Bonnie's parents had been on vacation at the time. The only thing she seemed to have taken from the house was the $80 she had been saving to buy a new bicycle. It is unknown how much of that cash she still had when she and Mitchell set off for the concert. Someone from the camp agreed to drive the Kachu teenagers into Narrowsburg and drop them off along State Route 97. Since they could not have had much money on them, they had no other option than to hitchhike to Watkins Glen, approximately 75 miles away. With only backpacks and sleeping bags, the two teenagers stood on the side of the road with a sign advertising their destination as the camp employee drove away. The person who gave them a ride is the last known person to see the couple. On the following Tuesday, someone from the camp finally called Bonnie's parents and told them that she had left. They also told her that she had not come back on Monday as she told them she would. Mitchell had not arrived back in Brooklyn either. The two families first went to the New York City Police Department. Since Bonnie and Mitchell were residents of the city, the department was obligated to provide resources for law enforcement upstate. The families were dismissed by the police in Brooklyn. They did not have better luck when they spoke to officials in Sullivan County, where Narrowsburg is located, and the last confirmed place the two were seen. Because of the couple's age and the concert they were hitchhiking to, authorities dismissed the pair as hippies who must have run off to San Francisco or some other countercultural hotspot. It was later revealed during an investigation by journalist Eric Greenberg in 1994 that the lack of concern by the Sullivan County authorities at the time had resulted in the loss of several important documents in the case, including the original missing persons report and Bonnie and Mitchell's dental records. While Bonnie and Mitchell were considered to be very modern by their more traditional parents, they were definitely not hippies. Their most controversial decision in the eyes of their parents appears to have been their choice to become vegetarians. Bonnie's mother did not like that she wore jeans and went without a bra, but these fashion choices do not mean that Bonnie would run away to live some sort of vagabond lifestyle like authorities seem to believe. Bonnie and Mitchell attended John Dewey High School, an experimental school for the academically gifted. They were both very smart and involved at their school and seemed very focused on excelling in their education, a very traditional pursuit. It is true that Bonnie and Mitchell were both dealing with their own stressors at the time they went missing, which some might argue would give them reason to run away. Bonnie was prone to crying fits over her father's health. Her father, Theodore, was suffering from a degenerative neurological condition that eventually left him unable to even leave his home. Mitchell had been hoping to go away for college after graduating high school, but his parents were unable to afford for him to do so, so he was set to attend Brooklyn College instead. While these issues would be difficult for teenagers to work through, they are not the sort of problems that would make them want to run away. Bonnie was worried about losing her father, so it does not make sense for her to cut herself off from him. Mitchell wanted the best education possible, so it does not make sense for someone so concerned about his college education to drop out of high school. The Weisers and the Beekwoods both insist that running away was not something their children would do, and the circumstances of their lives seem to support their assertions. In February of 1974, with still no sign of their friends, students at John Dewey High held a Valentine's Day themed fundraiser to raise money to fund a search for the couple by Tracers Incorporated. The fundraiser was very successful, but the search was not. In 2000, the classes of 1974 and 1975 collected money to plant a tree and dedicate a plaque to Bonnie and Mitchell. The media coverage of the event, as well as Eric Greenberg's ongoing reporting of the case in the Jewish Week magazine, garnered more interest in the case and more cooperation from investigators at the state and local level. In 2000, Bonnie and Mitchell's case was featured on MSNBC. The show prompted a new witness, Alan Smith, to come forward. Smith told police that he had attended the Summer Jam in 1973 and hitched a ride to start making his way back home the day after the concert in an orange Volkswagen bus with a Pennsylvania license plate. He claims that Bonnie and Mitchell were also getting a ride in the van. Smith says that he and the driver were both very high at the time, but Bonnie and Mitchell were not. The group stopped off by a large river to cool off, although Smith does not remember which one. Smith says that he heard Bonnie scream from the river, and when he turned around, Mitchell jumped in to try to help her. The two teenagers were then pulled downriver by a strong current and disappeared from his view around Bend. Smith and the driver then got back in the van, but did not report the accident. Authorities deemed Smith's stories credible, even though he could not identify the couple in pictures. They checked with coroner's offices up and down the two major rivers in the area, but none of them had any record of unidentified remains matching Bonnie and Mitchell's descriptions. A forensic expert Mitchell's older sister consulted told her that if Smith's story were true, the couple's remains should have been discovered. Both the Bickwitt and the Weiser families have remained active in Bonnie and Mitchell's case over the past 40-plus years. Their extensive efforts have evolved from newspaper ads and mailing campaigns in the 1970s to media inquiries and a website in more recent years. In spite of their dedication, they still are without answers in the young couple's mysterious disappearance. William and Margaret Patterson were living a privileged life in 1957. The couple had moved to El Paso, Texas from Dallas in 1940 and built up a successful business, the Patterson Photo Supply Company. William also owned a share in a boat business. The couple lived in a nice home on Piedmont Avenue, drove a Cadillac, and owned property in Mexico. In early March, the Pattersons had another couple over to their home for dinner. Cecil Ward and his wife had a nice meal with the Pattersons, and afterwards, Cecile and William went out to the garage to put a coat of acrylic on a boat that William had been building. The following day, William and Margaret stopped in at Cecile's business, the Ward Auto Clinic, to say hello. A few days later, on Wednesday, March 6th, Cecile Ward came into work to find the Pattersons' Cadillac parked in the driveway of the auto clinic. Later in the day, a man named Doyle Kirkland came in and told Cecile Ward to service the Cadillac and repair a problem with its steering wheel. Doyle Kirkland was a manager at Duffy Photo Service, a rival business of Patterson Photo Supply. He was, in spite of this, still a friend of William Patterson. Cecile asked Doyle why he was arranging for service for the Pattersons' Cadillac. Doyle told him that the Pattersons left for a small vacation. This immediately bothered Cecile Ward. The Pattersons had not mentioned a vacation to Cecil or his wife at dinner or the following day at the auto clinic. William Patterson had even made plans with Cecil for later that same week. There was no indication that the Pattersons had plans to leave town. Doyle Kirkland continued to be involved in the Pattersons' affairs that week. On Friday 8th, Cecil called Patterson Photo Supply about having his electric sander returned. He had left it in the garage of the Patterson home and needed it back because one of his employees needed it to complete a job. It was brought into the Ward Auto Clinic by Doyle Kirkland. Doyle claimed to have seen it in the Patterson garage on the night of March 5th while he was helping William work on the boat. The Pattersons still being in El Paso on 5th is confirmed by the last known sighting of them by anyone other than Doyle. That evening, their neighbor, Jerry Cash, went to the Pattersons' home to drop off some boxes of Girl Scout cookies. She says that Margaret seemed upset and that William seemed bothered by having company in the house, so she did not stay very long. A new layer of mystery was added to the situation on March 15th. That day, the Pattersons' accountant, Herbert Roth, received a telegram with instructions about the Pattersons' estate. Roth was to serve as the business manager for Patterson Photo Supply. He was instructed to rent out the Patterson family home for at least 9 months and sell a mobile home William and Margaret owned to help with the expenses of the business. Roth was also told to hire someone to manage the photo supply business in William's absence. That person was supposed to be Doyle Kirkland. The telegram had been called into the Western Union office in Dallas. It had been signed W.H. Patterson. William's middle name was Durrell, so if he did send the telegram, either he forgot his own initials or the Western Union worker made a mistake. Since the telegram had been called in, there is no handwritten original to examine. Herbert Roth followed the instructions in the telegram and had the house prepared for renters. The state of the house did not seem to indicate that the Pattersons had knowingly left home for an extended period of time. The home was in disarray, but the couple's clothes and valuables were still there. There were dinner dishes still in the sink. The Pattersons had clothes, including an expensive fur coat, still at the cleaners, and none of the utilities had been turned off. They continued to receive the newspaper. In spite of all this, the house was still rented out. The final straw that resulted in the police being called about the couple's disappearance came in November in the form of a cat. The Pattersons' 9-year-old orange tabby cat, Tommy, turned back up at the Patterson home and was discovered by the people renting it. Tommy was thin and ragged and had clearly not been taken care of for some time. Margaret had loved Tommy dearly and had treated him like her child. There was even a rumor that she went so far as to feed her beloved pet caviar. When the Pattersons traveled, they always boarded Tommy so that he would be well cared for in their absence. When the neglected cat who turned up at the Pattersons' doorstep was confirmed to be Tommy, the police were finally called. An inquest into the couple's disappearance was ordered but was muddied by the couple's secretive nature. None of Margaret's family gave testimony at the inquest as they had not had any contact with her in 20 years. They did not approve of her marrying William because he had grown up traveling with the carnival, and when she chose to go through with the wedding she was disowned. Margaret was very guarded, even with her friends, about details of her early life. She claimed she had a difficult childhood but would not provide any details about it. She would not tell anyone her birthday or how she and William had met. William's father, Luther, did come from Chicago to speak at the inquest, although he was not concerned about his son and daughter-in-law. He believed that his son was still a carny at heart and told authorities that he had expected William and Margaret to drop everything to go on the road at some point ever since they had gotten married. After a few years with no sign of them, however, Luther did concede that the couple was probably dead. In the course of the inquest, it was also discovered that William had a mistress, 20-year-old Estefana Arroyo Morfin, who lived in Juarez, Mexico. The Pattersons were declared legally dead in 1964, but their case stalled for decades. In 1984, a new witness came forward. Reynaldo Nanguer had been the caretaker of the Pattersons' home at the time they went missing. At the time, he had also been in the United States illegally. Since he was a U.S. citizen by 1984, he felt comfortable talking to police. He claimed that shortly after the Pattersons went missing, he had found blood in their garage and skin from a human scalp on the propeller of the boat the couple was storing there. Not wanting to be deported if he spoke to police, he had simply cleaned up the blood. He also claimed that he had seen an associate of the Pattersons putting bloody sheets from the house into the trunk of a car, although he could not identify who that associate was. Reynaldo died in a car accident in 1986. Due to the fact that the couple vanished during the Cold War, espionage was tossed around as an explanation for the disappearance, but the theory did not get any real credibility until 2009. That year, El Paso County Sheriff Leo Semenigo told the El Paso Times that he believed William and Margaret had been spies and that they had vanished so abruptly because they had been recalled by whatever foreign government they worked for. He based his belief on a report of William Patterson having been seen photographing nearby Fort Bliss and military shipments on trains on their way there. While answers remain scarce in this case, its influence can still be felt in El Paso. The mysterious disappearance has led to numerous urban legends and rumors. The Pattersons' house on Piedmont is now rumored to be haunted, and over the years the home's new occupants have been startled by numerous teenagers who have been dared to venture onto the property. Since both Margaret and William would be well over 100 years old in 2019, they almost certainly have passed away. No matter what the reason they suddenly vanished in 1957 was. Bernard Ruzens lived in Wolf Lake, Minnesota with his wife, Peggy Parmenter, and their 8-year-old son Brian in 1976. Peggy had first come back to Wolf Lake from North Dakota in 1974 to take care of her ailing mother. Bernard moved there a year later after Peggy's mother passed away. The family lived in the home that Peggy's mother originally owned and had spent a great deal of time remodeling the property. The couple was not very social and their neighbors knew very little about them. While Peggy did use a babysitter for her son, that babysitter described her as being very protective of Brian. Wolf Creek was a small town though, so people were able to take note of the couple's comings and goings to some degree. On April 3, 1976, the couple was seen at the grocery store. At around 4 p.m. the same day, Bernard was seen doing work in his driveway. Just before midnight, a neighbor caught sight of something much more troubling at the couple's home. The house was on fire. The house was completely destroyed in the fire. In the ashes, authorities located the body of 8-year-old Brian. They also found the remains of the family's 2 dogs. They did not, however, find the remains of either Bernard or Peggy. According to the fire marshal, the couple escaped from the blaze. Where the 2 went after leaving the home remains a mystery. Both their cars were in the driveway with the keys inside. They never used their bank account, and they each had a paycheck waiting for them that they never picked up. After the couple's disappearance, it was discovered that despite how they presented themselves as husband and wife, they were not actually legally married. Bernard had never finalized his divorce from his first wife back in Fargo. This, of course, raised concerns that the pair may have had more serious secrets. Did they have enemies with a motive to abduct them and set their home on fire? The case remains unsolved, although foul play is suspected. Ben Rank was just 29 years old when he was found deceased in his renowned snake breeding facility. Benjamin Blue Birch Rank was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in the countryside alongside his family. Ben had an older brother, Sam, with whom he shared a very close bond. In 1989, the Rank family moved to a picturesque farmhouse. The boys spent a lot of their time outdoors, and it was then that Ben began to take an interest in snakes. A tragic incident in September 1992 triggered a series of unfortunate events. The family was away when a gas leak occurred, leading to an explosion in their beautiful home. The Ranks were forced to move into a trailer. After some time, Ben's mother, Kim, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Despite these hardships, the family overcame them. They were very close-knit and always supported each other in any situation. Recovering from previous tragedies, in 2002, they moved to a new home where a special room was designed for Ben to keep his snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Kim passed away. Before her death, she made her sons promise to look after the farm and pass it on to their children. As time went by, Ben's love for snakes knew no bounds, and the young man founded Renec Reptiles, which soon gained recognition. This allowed him to sell snakes worldwide from the United Kingdom to Japan. Breeding snakes became the meaning of his life. He was described as a great breeder who was devoted to his work, caring more about the snakes than the money. The reptile farm bred a multitude of reptilian subspecies, growing and reproducing both the most common species and some of the rarest subspecies on Earth. Ben's reptiles were of immense value. Just a portion of his python collection was valued at over $1 million. Ben was a solitary man who had long aspired to start a. In 2010, at a party, he met a woman named Lindley. Their relationship moved forward quickly. Within weeks, Ben introduced his girlfriend to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé, Eli. Eli and Lindley had sons from previous relationships, so they found common ground quickly and became friends. Lindley soon became part of the Rank family. The couple began living together. Lindley helped Ben at the snake breeding farm. They were in love and lived as a full family. In March 2012, Lindley gave birth to their daughter Amelia. Ben was thrilled to become a father. However, the happy family life faced challenges again. Frank Rank, Ben's father, encountered significant business troubles. Previously, he had engaged in fraudulent stock transactions to cover medical bills and Kim's treatment expenses. Just a day before the FBI planned to visit the farm, Frank took his own life. Frank's passing halted the investigation. The sons were deeply affected by another parental loss, but managed to pull through by supporting each other. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received an amount of money far exceeding the house's value. Each brother had their own family and children, but this didn't stop them from living as one big family in their parents' home. They lived together harmoniously, with Sam spending his inheritance on repairing the farm without hesitation. Initially, things were fine, But soon financial disputes caused friction between the brothers after their father's death. Ben focused on his business and family and decided to formalize his relationship with Lindley on April 14, 2014. They married, officially adding Lindley as a full-fledged member of the Rank household. Ben and Lindley also opened a second business, a spa named Essentia Spa Inc., but it faced financial difficulties under Lindley's management. Financial issues often led to arguments between them, despite Lindley's hard work being insufficient to cover all salon expenses consistently. At the same time, Sam and his wife faced significant financial challenges. Ben allowed them to sell some of the furniture of the house. Lindley disapproved, leading to a rift between the families. The relationship was irreparably damaged. Ben decided to improve the family's financial situation by arranging to sell some rare reptiles for a significant sum. However, the deal fell through due to a tragedy that occurred on the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindley walked into one of the farm's barns. There, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay Ben. Lindley called her brother Sam for help and dialed the emergency number. She reported that she had found her husband unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindley dropped the phone and ran outside. Sam continued the conversation and confirmed that his brother was dead. Sam suggested that a snake might be to blame for what had happened. Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies were called to the snake breeding facility for the first time in a long while. Law enforcement officers were afraid to enter the farm, facing over 3,000 snakes and having to conduct an examination of a man lying in blood, wary of a possible attack from a deadly viper believed to be the assailant. However, when coroner Dave Colbert arrived and took a closer look, he discovered a shell casings on a shelf at eye level. This was something far more sinister than a venomous snake bite. Shell casings were found near the body, but no weapon was discovered. The assailant had shot Ben multiple times in the back and head. None of the relatives heard shots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindley were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindley suggested that Sam might be involved in her husband's death, even citing a motive. Apparently Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was opposed. Sam was asked to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed. The police had no reason to detain Lindley and Sam, so they were released. The investigation into who might have wanted Ben Rank dead began with various theories proposed, the first being robbery. But it remained unconfirmed as none of the rare snakes were missing and all valuable items remained untouched. Just days after Ben's demise, police interrogated Lindley again and tested her hands and clothing for gunpowder residue. However, results came back negative. Following her husband's funeral, Lindley ceased communication with Sam and Eli altogether. She sold her husband's business, inherited the house, and sought to claim a life insurance payout for Ben worth $1 million after receiving the insurance money. Lindley planned to sell the Rennick family home for $740,000. Sam's family was notified about the eviction. Discovering the rapid insurance claim and business sale following her husband's passing, Sam Rennick suspected his brother's wife in the tragic event. Sharing his suspicions with investigators, Lindley was called in for another interrogation. There, she admitted to having complex relations with Ben and occasionally meeting with a man named Eric. Eric had an alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Lindley's admissions was startling. It turned out about 3 years after their marriage was officially registered. She was unfaithful to Ben with at least 2 different men. Messages between the couple showed that Ben suspected his wife of infidelity, which had indeed strained their relationship lately. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted a polygraph test on Lindley and informed her that she had failed it. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, she was released. Nevertheless, the investigation into Ben Rennick's case slowed but did not cease. Later investigators learned that a month before Ben Rennick's passing, Lindley had made her first attempt on his life. She concocted a story of Ben being a cruel tyrant who oppressed her daily and even physically assaulted her. She shared the story with a spa salon coworker to garner support and assistance. They plotted to end Ben's life by giving him a poisonous protein shake laced with 15 Percocet pills. Unaware, Ben drank it. He fell severely ill during that period but survived, oblivious to having been poisoned. Lindley Rennick was interrogated by investigators 6 times in total, and further assistance in the investigation came unexpectedly. On January 14, 2020, information from a state prison emerged. A witness claimed to know about Ben Rennick's death. The witness was Brandon Blackwell. He told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindley had shot Ben and conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon mentioned that he had dated Lindley while she was married to Ben. 1.5 years after Ben's death, they had a child together. But by 2019, they had separated. Brandon claimed that Lindley confessed to the act and conspired with her spa salon coworker, Ashley Shore, and another ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. Years after Ben's demise, Lindley Rennick and her former boyfriend Michael Humphrey were arrested for his death. However, following their arrest, Lindley and Humphrey pointed fingers at each other. So who really pulled the trigger? According to Michael's testimony on the day of the event, he went to the farm with Lindley, who asked him to pose as a buyer. He put on gloves and was supposed to shoot Ben but couldn't do it. Eventually, Lindley took the gun and shot her husband herself. The investigation into Ben Rennick's death continued for 3 long years. On January 16, 2020, arrest warrants were issued for Lindley Rennick, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation and testified against her boss. The former Spursulant employee shared that Lindley had complained about her husband and convinced her to assist in a plan. She claimed that Ben was constantly belittling, demeaning, and even physically harming her. Fearing divorce would lead to Ben gaining custody of her children, Lindley decided to eliminate him. Planning together to poison him with a lethal cocktail during questioning, Lindley and Michael accused each other of Ben's demise. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey faced trial in Aon County. His lawyers hoped that revealing the murder weapon would lead to a second-degree murder charge. Despite possessing the gun, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To lessen his sentence, Michael Humphrey made a deal with the prosecution by disclosing the location of the murder weapon. His cooperation led to a life sentence on a less severe charge of second-degree murder without defense at the trial. On January 3, 2021, Michael Humphrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The against Lindley Rennick began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with the shooting and demise of Ben Rennick on June 8, 2017, at his snake breeding facility in New Florence. Court documents stated that the plot to end Ben Rennick's life originated in Lindley's spa salon. The probable cause statement mentioned that Ben was aware of Lindley's financial troubles and that Lindley feared Ben could take her children away. This led her to fabricate a story of domestic abuse. The first attempt to end Ben Rennick involved a protein shake laced with narcotics. Search warrants for Ben and Lindley Rennick's Facebook accounts confirmed the protein shake story and Ben's awareness of Lindley's financial issues. The court hearing detailed the events of the day when Ben Rennick was killed, fully reconstructing the sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the incident, Michael Humphrey picked up Lindley from the spa salon, while Shaw sent text messages from Lindley's phone inside the spa to conceal their true location and mislead the investigation. According to court documents, Humphrey intended to end Ben's life but asked Lindley to do it. After firing shots, Humphrey collected most of the casings but missed some in his haste. He also disposed of Lindley's clothing after returning to the spa, where Lindley took a shower, which helped avoid detection of gunpowder residue on her hands and clothes. Defense attorney Catherine Barrouz asked Lindley Rennick to share her personal and family history, education, relationship with ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, work history, and the lead-up to her marriage with Ben Rennick. This was aimed at portraying her as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, undermining this defense narrative. Michael Humphrey was part of a group that allegedly planned to end Ben Rennick's life. Lindley Rennick described her relationship with Humphrey as codependent, involving his drug dealing and her addiction. She ended her relationship with Humphrey at the end of 2010, according to previous witness statements, but reconnected with him about a month before Ben Rennick's death. Lindley Rennick firmly denied the prosecution's allegations regarding the alleged plans to end Ben Rennick's life. This included the supposed failed attempt to poison Ben with a protein shake containing narcotics. The couple faced financial and marital difficulties. The spa center wasn't doing well, and contractual deals for selling snakes had yet to provide financial benefits. In court, Lindley admitted to having extramarital relationships with several men, expressing deep regret for her actions. By the time she considered discussing divorce, she was unsure who to turn to, given her father's history with divorce and his strong views on both divorce and affairs. Seeking someone to support her in her conversation with Ben, she reached out to past boyfriends and reconnected with Michael Humphrey. During cross-examination by the prosecution, Lindley confessed to willingly participating in her husband's death and intentionally concealing Michael Humphrey's involvement. She cited marital difficulties, including disputes, alleged physical and sexual abuse by Ben, and the stress associated with his snake breeding business. Lindley feared Ben and worried about his reaction whenever she brought up the topic of divorce. On June 8, 2017, she brought Michael Humphrey to the farm that day. She claimed her presence at the farm was not meant to end her husband's life, but rather to discuss a divorce. Lindley mentioned taking out some trash from Ben before entering the nursery, where she saw Humphrey and Ben washing their hands. Lindley described being unable to hear their conversation, as she was preoccupied with how she would tell Ben she wanted a divorce. Her voice trembled while recounting seeing Humphrey draw a pistol and shoot her husband. Then she heard more shots. Reality hit hard when Lindley returned to the snake breeding facility and found Ben's body. She called Ben's brother Sam, who arrived soon after. They checked for a pulse and whether Ben was breathing, hoping he might still be alive. Lindley expressed regret for not immediately informing police that she had been at the breeding facility earlier with Michael Humphrey. The life insurance policy that Ben had taken out years earlier could have resulted in a payout of $1 million, however. Lindley waived her rights to this money. During the court hearing, Lindley expressed regrets about her ongoing deceit. "I was just trying to escape from the truth of what happened," she stated, clarifying that she never wished for her husband's death. Following the final verdict, Lindley Rank's defense team chose not to petition for a new trial, and no appeals were filed against her conviction. Lindley Ranke filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, asserting that his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindley's testimony during cross-examination. He queried why she didn't check on her husband after hearing gunshots and why she didn't call 911. Furthermore, he asked why she sent friendly messages to him and Humphrey after the shooting and continued to lie even when emergency responders got involved. During sentencing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindley Rannick broke down but did not admit guilt. On December 9, 2021, she was found guilty of second-degree murder. The 33-year-old was sentenced to 13 years for murder and an additional 3 years for armed criminal action in January by Judge Kevin Crane, a total sentence of 16 years. Sam Rennick's final words conveyed deep disappointment. He was astonished that an individual's life in Missouri could be valued at just 13 years. Ben Rennick, a young man brimming with hope and a promising future, found himself in a dire situation due to the actions of one woman. The case of Cecile Bloch. 3.5 decades after the chilling and mysterious murder of 11-year-old French girl Cecile Bloch, the veil of secrecy was finally lifted by the revelation of DNA evidence. Unveiled alongside this newfound truth after the 35-year hunt was a horrifying connection. The same malevolent hand that took Cecile's innocence also stained France with the blood of other victims during the dark period from 1986 to 1994. To make it worse, the chilling revelation was that the very person responsible for these heinous acts was someone who was supposed to be a guardian of the law, a gendarme, and a policeman at the time of the murders. This is the tragic tale of Cecile Bloch. It's the fateful morning of May 5, 1986. The universe seemed to conspire against 24-year-old Luc Bloch, with the day kicking off on the wrong foot. First, his alarm clock didn't go off. And to make matters worse, nobody in the Bloch household had the foresight to rouse him from his restless slumber. Luc, now in a mad dash to get to work, also had to make sure his young sister wasn't late to school. With a sense of urgency gnawing at his heels, he calls out to his little sister, telling her to hasten her preparations for school as he hurriedly leaves the apartment. In those days, it was common for children to go to school on their own. Every morning on weekdays, the parents Jean-Pierre and Suzanne Bloch would embark on their own journeys to work by 8 a.m. Luc, too, would depart the family apartment, leaving just before Cecile, who typically set off for her classes around 8:45 a.m. Lunchtime brought a cherished routine. Cecile would return home alone, savoring a comforting bowl of soup, before serenading the household with her beloved violin. This gifted young girl was a maestro of melodies and really loved music. She harbored an affection for dogs and also excelled at school. At noon, her loving mother Suzanne would routinely dial the family apartment to make sure her daughter got home safely and had taken her lunch. But on that fateful day, an eerie silence met her call. The girl didn't pick up the phone, and this would lead to a horrific revelation that would create many questions of what had truly transpired on this fateful day. Let me take you back to the moment Luc Bloch embarked on his daily journey to work. As he stepped out of the apartment, the darkness of the landing greeted him yet again. There was no light for the third consecutive day. Frustration coursed through him as his fingers fumbled in the inky darkness to find the elevator button. The only functioning elevator glided to a halt on the third floor, and inside stood a well-dressed young man. This man, possibly in his late 20s, possessed an athletic build with a pockmarked face. Luc, feeling a twinge of embarrassment, extended a cordial greeting, then disembarked on the first floor. The stranger wished him a strangely emphatic good day. Something about this encounter struck Luc as peculiar. The man's politeness appeared excessive for a stranger. It was almost unnerving. In hindsight, Luc would recall the haunting final words uttered by this strange man. "Have a very, very good day." Little did he realize that in a matter of minutes, this very man would perpetrate the unspeakable to his young sister that would forever leave a scar in his heart. The clock struck 8:20 a.m., and within the building, the concierge perused a fresh newspaper while neighbors bustled about their morning routines. None among the building's residents could fathom that in just half an hour, young Cecile would meet her tragic fate, a fate that awaited her lifeless form in the shadowy depths of the building's basement, a staggering 3 floors beneath the building that was once her peaceful home. Suzanne, her heart sinking with each unanswered call, began to entertain a glimmer of hope that Cecile might be at her friend's house. She dialed the number, praying for a reassuring voice on the other end, but her fear intensified. As her friend confirmed the chilling truth, Cecile hadn't been to school, and she hadn't seen her that day either. By 1 p.m., panic had engulfed the parents, driving them to sprint back into the apartment, their frantic voices echoing as they desperately called out for their beloved daughter. Cecile was nowhere to be found. Suzanne's gaze fell upon her daughter's absent school bag, a sign that she had indeed departed. But to where? Meanwhile, Jean-Pierre initiated a series of agonizing calls to local hospitals. Their anxious pleas met with the same heartbreaking reply. No girl matching Cecile's description had been admitted. In the building's lobby, the parents beseeched the concierge to aid in the search for their missing child. With urgency fueling their every step, they raced to the police station, scouring the nearby streets and playgrounds as they went. Cecile was known for her unwavering attendance at school, and there were no significant issues at home to explain her absence. The question loomed large. Why had she left and where had she gone? The concierge, now joined by 2 concerned neighbors, embarked on a painstaking search of the building floor by floor, inching their way downwards. But the haunting truth remained. Cecile had vanished without a trace. All that remained was to descend into the foreboding cellar. The first room they entered was empty and devoid of any answers, while the second room stood locked. They then entered the third room, a chamber of forgotten clutter that obscured any immediate revelation. The room was a chaotic maze of forgotten possessions, a lot of junk from years past, so densely entangled that nothing could be seen at a single glance. In a breathless moment, a flashlight pierced the darkness, casting a feeble glow upon the basement's desolation. At first glance, it appeared vacant, but just as they were about to retreat, at the corner of his eye, one man caught a glimpse of something amiss in the periphery. A grimy, time-worn carpet that seemed to conceal something beneath it. He summoned the others, a glimmer of dread, tugging at their hearts. Unfortunately, they found who they were looking for, but not the way they hoped they would find her. Outside the house, police cars and an ambulance had already arrived at the scene when Cecile's parents returned. They rushed past the gathered crowd in the basement. It was too late. The innocent life of young Cecile had already been taken, her innocence brutally shattered. The wheels of justice began to turn as a relentless investigation was launched into the heart-wrenching homicide. The grim investigation unveiled a chilling timeline. The malevolent intruder had infiltrated the block, lingering within its walls, and shared a sinister 40-minute encounter with Cecile, with witnesses testifying that he had departed the building at 9:20 a.m. They all echoed a hauntingly consistent description of the suspect. A dark-haired young man, aged between 25-30, his face marred by the cruel reminders of severe acne scars. The very same man who had exchanged strange pleasantries with Luke that morning. Drawing from the accounts of 6 witnesses and Luke's recollection, the police conjured a rough sketch of the male factor, which found its way onto the pages of newspapers across France. While investigators managed to secure the assailant's biological material and ascertain his blood type, the nascent era of DNA forensics limited their progress. The evidence, a tantalizing puzzle piece, remained locked in a cold, waiting silence as the promise of breakthroughs in forensic science beckoned from the shadows. Yet the revelations remained scant, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a community haunted by uncertainty. Just a month prior, the city had shuddered at the news of a similar predator haunting their midst. A man bearing an uncanny resemblance to the male factor now under investigation had assaulted an 8-year-old girl in an elevator. Yet miraculously, she had survived to share her harrowing tale with investigators. This brave child, known only as Sarah, recounted how the man had cunningly posed as a police officer during the ordeal. What sent shock waves through the community were the eerie parallels emerging in 3 additional sexual assault cases. In these grim chapters, the assailant, employing the same sinister ruse, had targeted a 26-year-old woman and 2 young girls aged 11 and 14. Each victim had fallen prey to his apparent police identification card, and was this a deceitful ploy to gain the trust of unsuspecting victims, or was he actually a police officer? Their suspicions were stoked, not only by the violence inflicted upon his victims, but also by the chillingly calculated tactics he employed. A nagging intuition lingered among investigators, a conviction that this male factor was no ordinary criminal. Their gut told them he was either a sworn officer or a gendarme, a belief that would later be chillingly confirmed. However, capturing this predator was far from straightforward as he continued to elude the clutches of justice with diabolical cunning. Despite widespread distribution of the sketch to the local population, it proved futile in unmasking the perpetrator. By the close of 1987, a sinister shadow had been cast over a number of crimes, all attributed to this man based on his distinctive appearance and chilling demeanor. The investigation remained in an agonizing deadlock for years, swinging back and forth between closed and reopened status. In a cruel twist of fate, the latest DNA tests conducted in a bid for justice yielded inconclusive results, shrouding the identity of the perpetrator in a veil of impenetrable darkness. Tragically, the parents of the young victim never lived to witness the moment of reckoning. Suzanne met her untimely end in a devastating traffic accident in 1989, while Jean-Pierre departed the world in 2011. Their hearts bore the heavy burden of never knowing the face of the monster who had stolen their beloved Cecile away forever, leaving a haunting legacy of unresolved pain and injustice. The embers of the unresolved mystery began to rekindle, lighting the way for the determined cold case detectives. They uncovered a piece of evidence that sparked a glimmer of hope. The killer, known to drive a white car, had once been a member of the prestigious gendarmerie. His chilling history culminated in a final crime committed near a gendarmerie training center. The techniques he used displayed the unmistakable signs of police and military training. In 2021, the police made a bold move. They called in around 750 former police officers who had worked in the Paris area during the time of the crimes. Among them was the very man who had evaded justice for so long, who was called in for questioning on September 29, 2021. The investigators' goal was clear: to collect the DNA of these suspects, hoping fervently that the murderer might finally be identified among them. The plot took a harrowing twist on September 24th, when a summons landed in the hands of a man, compelling his appearance for questioning on September 29th. The demand extended further, requiring the surrender of a DNA sample. However, in a startling turn of events, the narrative pivoted on September 27th when the man's wife reported him missing. As the clock ticked relentlessly towards the fateful date, the puzzle was far from complete. 2 days later, on September 29, 2021, in a quiet town in the south of France, tragedy struck in the form of a suicide. François Vero-Yves, a 59-year-old man, chose to end his own life, leaving behind a farewell note that laid bare a haunting confession. Among its chilling lines, it read, "I admit being a great criminal who committed unforgivable acts until the end of the 1990s. In a heart-wrenching conclusion, DNA tests revealed the somber truth. The man authorities had hunted relentlessly for years. The pockmarked man, the elusive predator, was unmasked as François Vero-Yves. However, much about his background remained shrouded in mystery. Born on January 22, 1962 in France, he had grown up under the stern gaze of a strict father, a stepmother, and 2 stepsisters. His biological mother had succumbed to the ruthless grip of the flu. In his youth, he had harbored an unsettling fascination with horror movies, perhaps offering a glimpse into the darkness that would later consume him. In 1983, François embarked on a new chapter as he moved to Paris and joined the National Gendarmerie. By June 1985, he had married and took it upon himself to construct a family home from the ground up, a testament to his ambitions. In the eyes of a former friend, he wore the dual masks of kindness and decency, but his temper lurked just beneath the surface, a volatile element that could erupt without warning. Behind this facade, however, lay a chilling truth. He was completely the opposite of the positive traits he may have portrayed to others. For innocent young girls had suffered beneath his sinister hand, miraculously escaping his clutches, all except for young Cecile Bloch. François' malevolence didn't stop there. In 1987, he cold-bloodedly murdered 2 adults, 38-year-old Gilles Pulitti and his devoted housekeeper, Gard Muller. Armed with crucial DNA evidence, investigators embarked on a gripping journey, determined to unravel the secrets of a malefactor whose dark deeds seemed endless. They fervently believed his sinister trail of crimes extended far beyond those already uncovered, driving them to delve deeper into unsolved cases, searching for hidden connections that could reveal the full extent of his reign of terror. Unfortunately, earthly justice may never hold him accountable for his atrocities, and retribution seems out of reach. The specter of his deeds looms large, leaving the question of inevitable justice to the realm beyond. As this harrowing tale unfolds, we are left with unanswered questions, wounds that may never fully heal, and the haunting presence of a man who committed unspeakable acts. François Vero may have evaded earthly justice, but his actions are forever etched in the indelible ink of infamy. Amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope stands as a testament to the relentless tenacity of those who pursued answers. With advancements in DNA technology, the truth emerged from the depths of despair. In the afterlife, in the realm beyond, justice may yet find its elusive mark, allowing the innocent souls scarred by his malevolence to finally rest in peace. In the shadow of these chilling revelations, let us remember all those who suffered at the hands of this predator. Their memory lives on as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of our world, the relentless pursuit of justice can be a beacon of hope. As we close this chapter of human frailty and malevolence, let us remember Cecile, not for the darkness that took her, but for the vibrant spirit she once embodied. For every life taken too soon, there remains a legacy that defies the shadows, a testament to the unwavering hope that someday justice will prevail. May the souls of Cecile and all the other victims rest in eternal peace. In 1998, 19-year-old Troy Cook was experiencing a significant milestone, moving out of his family home. Troy had worked part-time at an Atlantic superstore while still in school and was promoted to full-time after graduating. While he didn't see this job as his long-term career, it provided him with enough income to begin searching for his first apartment. That May, he left his parents' home in rural Kemptown, Nova Scotia, and moved into a small apartment in Truro, the larger town where he worked. He shared a modest 2-bedroom apartment with a coworker, just a short walk from the store. On June 10th, only 3 weeks after moving out, Troy visited his family and stayed overnight. The next morning, June 11th, his father, Tom, drove him back to Truro. During the ride, they confirmed plans to meet for dinner the following evening. Tom dropped Troy off in front of his apartment but didn't wait to see him enter, as he was in a hurry to drop his car off for service and head to work. About half an hour later, the Atlantic superstore where Troy worked received a phone call. Troy, or someone claiming to be him, told his supervisor that he would not be able to make it in for his shift later that day. The call was strange enough in that Troy was not one to call out of work. While he made enough to pay his bills, he could not afford to miss too many shifts. Troy's supervisor was reasonably sure it was Troy on the phone, but could not be positive because he did sound strange. As such, it could have been someone other than Troy making the call, or Troy was making the call under duress. When Troy did not show up at the restaurant to meet his family for dinner on June 12th, the day after he was last seen, his father began calling Troy's work and several of his friends to try to find him. When he could not locate his son, he contacted authorities to report Troy missing. The mysterious phone call to the Atlantic superstore got even stranger when the call was traced. Authorities determined that it had been made from a phone booth outside of a Tim Hortons in Bible Hill, Nova Scotia. Bible Hill is a suburb of Truro, one that Troy and his father had to drive past on their way to Troy's apartment on the morning of 11th. If Troy needed to be in Bible Hill that morning, it does not make sense that he would let his father drive past the town and then retrace his route to get there after being dropped off in Truro. Furthermore, there would not have been enough time for Troy to have made his way from his apartment in Truro to the Tim Hortons in Bible Hill on foot in between the time he was dropped off and the time the phone call was made. Since Troy's apartment was so close to his job, he had not brought his car with him when he moved into Truro. Either Troy did not make the phone call or some unknown person had to have driven him to the phone booth. When Troy was not immediately located, his family had to make the decision to pack up his apartment and bring his belongings back to their home. Tom Cook saw Troy's roommate at the Atlantic superstore, where he had worked with Troy, and told him about these plans. The roommate asked that Tom leave him Troy's 2 guitars, claiming that is what Troy would have wanted. Troy had only been missing for 2 weeks at the time of this conversation. Tom did not agree to the insensitive and, quite frankly, suspicious request. Tom Cook has spent the 20 years since Troy vanished dedicated to finding his son. He plastered the Truro area with flyers immediately after Troy went missing and even had one posted in his car so that people could learn about Troy's case wherever he drove. He continues to actively seek out media interviews to keep Troy's case in the public eye. The only real break he has taken from his work came in the spring of 2016 when he had to have surgery and treatment for a brain tumor. The stress and heartbreak of Troy's disappearance ultimately caused Tom and Troy's mother to divorce. In interviews, Tom has also shared his concern that his focus on Troy has negatively impacted his younger son, Mike. While Mike is not as public of a figure as his father, he has been active in the search for his older brother. He set up a Facebook group in hopes that spreading awareness about Troy's case will eventually bring answers for his family. Henrietta Cruz lived in Santa Ana, California with her parents and her younger siblings. As a teenager, she dropped out of Santa Ana High School to take a job in a shop. In the spring of 1960, 17-year-old Henrietta met a 24-year-old man named Merle Avila. A month later, the two were married. Henrietta and hasty marriage did not seem to remain happy for long. By the summer of 1960, Henrietta's parents stopped hearing from her. When they got a hold of Merle to ask him about their daughter, he told them that 3 months into their marriage, Henrietta had packed up her things and left him. Henrietta's parents reported her missing to the police in the beginning of August. After police began investigating Henrietta's whereabouts, Merle claimed to see her at a park in nearby Long Beach, California on August 20th. A week later, on August 27th, Henrietta's mother received a collect phone call from a woman claiming to be Henrietta. Her mother said that she would accept the charges for the call, but the woman on the other end of the line hung up the phone before Henrietta's mother could actually speak with her. Police would eventually trace the call to San Francisco. That same day, the Cruz family received a telegram. It was signed Henrietta. It said that she was fine and had gotten a job, but did not want to come back to her husband. Police learned that the telegram had been called in from a payphone in San Francisco. The woman who called it in had provided a fake address. An even stranger event occurred over a year after Henrietta went missing. Just before Christmas of 1961, Henrietta's father went outside to get in his car and drive to work. On the trunk of the car were undergarments that had belonged to Henrietta, as well as a belt. There was no other sign of Henrietta or whoever dropped these items off at the home. The fact that all of these instances of supposed contact with Henrietta stops short of actual interaction with her is concerning. Why would Henrietta call her mother but not actually speak with her? It is also suspicious that none of these communications from someone claiming to be Henrietta came until after her parents realized she was gone and contacted the police. It appears as though Henrietta met with foul play, and the person responsible attempted to create the illusion that Henrietta was alive but living in San Francisco to keep the police from seriously investigating the case. Since Merle was the last person who saw Henrietta and he knew that the police were looking for her, it is hard not to be suspicious of his account of how Henrietta left their home. Henrietta's parents appear to have accepted the possibility that she had been killed. They hired a private investigator and offered a reward in Henrietta's case. However, the newspaper ads they ran asking for help in locating Henrietta's remains, not discovering where she was living. Merle remarried in 1962, but there is no record of him legally divorcing Henrietta or having her declared dead. He and his second wife remained married until his death in 2012. Henrietta's case remains open with the Santa Ana police. Katrina McVey was struggling in 1992. The 27-year-old mother of three was in an abusive marriage with Richard McVey, who had recently gotten out of prison, following a 6-month sentence for domestic violence. After a violent altercation with Richard, Katrina fled their home in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. She was able to stay at a shelter for battered women, but Richard somehow discovered the confidential address of the facility and showed up there looking for her. The shelter believed that this made Katrina a security risk and made her leave. Katrina was then homeless, living for a time in World War II Memorial Park. Eventually, a friend named Judy Burton felt sorry for Katrina and let her come stay with her in her apartment at 295 2nd Avenue. While she was free from Richard, Katrina was cut off from her children and fell into the world of drugs and prostitution to support herself. She was last seen by Judy Burton around May 15th, 1992 at the intersection of Lincoln and Front Streets. She got into a car and has not been seen since. Due to Katrina's unstable situation, Judy Burton did not notify police when Katrina never came back to her apartment. After being unable to reach Katrina, her family reported her missing a month after the last known sighting of her. Katrina's mother, Charlotte Saulnier, believes that her daughter was murdered at the time of her disappearance by someone close to her, and that she was buried along the banks of the Blackstone River. This detail comes from a phone call Charlotte received from Katrina's husband Richard a few weeks after she had reported her daughter missing. She claims that in this phone call, Richard told her that Katrina was down by the Blackstone River. Richard McVey had an extensive criminal record, serving time in prison both before and after Katrina went missing. He had been in prison until just prior to Katrina's disappearance, and he was back in prison just 4 months after it occurred. His convictions over the years included first-degree sexual assault and child abuse. His first wife allegedly died under suspicious circumstances. Richard ultimately died of lung cancer while incarcerated. Richard's phone call, along with rumors going around Woonsocket that also maintained that Katrina's remains were buried near the Blackstone River, led Katrina's brother, Todd Thibault, to spend his weekends searching the banks of the river. After a few weeks, he found one of the few pieces of physical evidence in the case. Along the Blackstone River, where it runs through Costa Park, Todd found a shirt he believes is the one his sister was last seen wearing. This discovery made Todd believe that he was on the right track, and he continued to scour the riverbanks in the coming weeks. It was at this point that Charlotte received another, more troubling phone call. A caller asked her to pass an ominous message along to Todd. "You'll never find her." So far, the statement has proven true. Over the years, as different cold case units have investigated the case, cadaver dogs have been brought to the Blackstone River, and an area was excavated in hopes of finding Katrina's remains. These efforts were unsuccessful. Katrina's mother and brother no longer live in Woonsocket. Todd is now a corrections officer in Indiana, but has returned to Rhode Island to speak to police about his sister's case. Charlotte Saulnier visited the Sales Street Bridge every year to throw a bouquet of carnations, Katrina's favorite flower, into the Blackstone River and say a prayer for her daughter for more than a decade. She only stopped when she could no longer leave her new home in Mississippi because she was providing care for ill relatives. Charlotte still holds out hope that one day she will be able to bury her daughter in their family plot, where Katrina will be able to lie next to her grandmother rather than in her unknown grave. The case of Lamu. Unhealthy relationships with a cruel person and a narcissist never lead to anything good. It is crucial to realize this in time and break off such connections before a tragedy occurs. Emotional abuse is typically just the beginning and a prelude to physical violence, which the abuser will use to control and dominate their partner, suppress them, and create an atmosphere of constant oppression and fear. Our story today revolves around a popular Chinese blogger, Lamu, whose tragic end a few years ago shocked all of China. Lamu, a simple girl from a poor family, captivated a large audience with her kindness, sincerity, and boundless love for nature, and met a horrific end at the hands of her once-loved partner. The most chilling part of this incident is that the assault on her was broadcast live, and thousands of followers could only watch helplessly. Lamu was born in 1990 in Yaowa, Tibetan, and Chang Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. Their family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lamu had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains, where, at certain times and in special places, they could find the rarest herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lamu was well versed in these plants and had a sincere love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity and drawing strength and inspiration from the mountains. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok. There, Lamu posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she was not chasing fame. Fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and almost childlike spontaneity. She never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. Lamu never used makeup or filters. Her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offered warm words, expressed gratitude for her work, and asked for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but she was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. In her youth, Lamu constantly went to the mountains with her parents and older sister. But as her sister grew up, got married, and moved to another province, and her parents, due to age, could no longer climb high or for long, Lamu took on all the work herself. She detailed to her followers the flora of the local area, explaining which specific flowers and herbs had what properties, how to collect them, and how to use them as food without accidentally harming the body. During certain seasons, Lamu could spend several weeks alone in the mountains gathering medicinal plants. She showed how she set up camps for the night, cooked her meals over a campfire, shared local legends and beliefs, and returned with a large and heavy backpack that seemed to weigh more than she did. But this strong, brave, and hardworking beauty never elicited pity because she glowed with happiness when engaging in her beloved activities in the mountains. Despite returning tired, worn out, and with bloody calluses, and despite never complaining about her tough fate and hard daily labor, Lamu Long avoided one topic. She did not discuss her personal life because she suffered for many years at the hands of her abusive husband, Tong Li, enduring beatings and humiliations. But she tried not to show that she was deeply unhappy. Tong Li was also a native of Sichuan province, born in 1990 into a simple and quite modest family. His parents adored their youngest son, indulging him from an early age, always striving to spoil and please him. At the age of 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, delivering groceries to local stores. He earned little but kept all the money to himself, not helping his family at all. Even then, the teenager began to show signs of greed, avarice, and narcissism. He believed the world revolved around him, that others owed him, but he owed nothing to anyone, desperate to become wealthy. He was willing to do anything, even break the law, and that's precisely what happened. At 15, Tong left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and began dealing in banned substances and petty theft. He also dabbled in gambling and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape the poverty he grew up in. Sometime later, Li's parents opened their own small spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. The business quickly took off, generating a decent income, and the family soon became well off by local standards. At that point, Tom decided to return home and offered to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives who worked hard daily. Tom considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries, boasting to friends about his expensive items, and behaving selfishly, even claiming the store's success as his own. Meanwhile, he kept in touch with local criminals, maintaining a separate, under-the-table business with them. First love. Tong and Lamu met when they were just 17. The young man was so enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity that he was head over heels in love. He courted her earnestly, giving gifts, and it seemed he was ready to change for her, become more mature and serious, and cut ties with the criminal world. The young and naive Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming with whom she would be happy. No one had ever courted her so diligently before, and no one had tried so hard to win her over. Soon, the young couple developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. As soon as Tong turned 19, he proposed to his beloved, who eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry. They tried to dissuade the young couple, believing they were too young to start a family. But the young lovers wouldn't listen to anyone. In 2009, they got married, and the newlywed wife moved into her mother-in-law's house, Lamu's personal hell. Initially, married life seemed quite blissful. Tong tried to be a good husband, left behind his bad influences and gambling, focusing on his young wife and the family business. Lamu took on almost all the household duties and also helped her beloved's parents in their shop. However, it wasn't long before her husband started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife drastically changed. Tong was no longer the gentle, kind, and caring man Lamu had fallen in love with a few years earlier. He became crude, self-centered, and aggressive. He took a portion of the store's earnings from a business where all the family members worked, except for him, claiming it as his share, and spent all the money on his own needs, entertainments, and pleasures. The couple started arguing frequently. Lamu tried to reason with her husband, urging him to get his act together, work honestly, quit drinking, and stop associating with people from the criminal world. But Tong wouldn't listen to either his wife or his mother, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. According to his parents' recollections, conflicts in their home became a daily occurrence. The situation didn't change even when Lamu became pregnant. Her husband continued to vanish with his friends, and when he returned home, he was rough and aggressive. He was annoyed that his wife was now more focused on herself and their future child. He himself, like a child, demanded attention, and during one disagreement, he raised his hand to her for the first time. Lamu was shocked by her husband's action and declared she would return to her parents' home as she refused to tolerate such treatment. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had unintentionally witnessed the incident, intervened. She approached her son and slapped him twice, telling him he had no right to treat the mother of his future child that way. Afterwards, the woman convinced her daughter-in-law to stay, promising that it would not happen again. Lamu believed her and decided to give her husband another chance, a decision she would bitterly regret as it was just the beginning of a real nightmare. From then on, Tong regularly became physically abusive, only to apologize afterward, crying and begging her not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had come to his senses and would genuinely change. But the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave her husband, he threatened to take their son away and do something terrible to her and her parents. Frightened, the young mother stayed, fearing he would carry out his threats. From then on, their child became his main tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu told none of her relatives about the nightmare unfolding in her husband's home. Even her older sister, with whom she had been very close since childhood, suspected nothing. In 2012, after a long and severe illness, Lamu's mother passed away, which was a huge shock for her. Her elderly father and grandmother were left virtually helpless, and she found herself literally living between two homes, managing to maintain order, cook, and help with the household chores everywhere. Meanwhile, Lamu continued to regularly climb the mountains for herbs to financially support both families. Only in the mountains, amidst the hard work, paradoxically, could she rest, be alone with her thoughts, stay, and breathe freely without fear of her disgruntled husband coming home, causing a scene and hitting her again. In 2017, the woman gave birth to a second son. Relations with her husband remained strained, and her mother-in-law had long stopped trying to intervene on her daughter-in-law's behalf, though she took on all the care of the grandchildren when Lamu went to work in the mountains. Around the same time, Lamu created her account on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, where she started posting short videos showcasing the local beauty, discussing various flowers and herbs, their medicinal properties, and how to use them. Engaging with her audience became the outlet Lamu desperately needed to keep from going insane. Sometimes she quietly sang songs for her followers and sometimes danced against the backdrop of mountain ridges. She always appeared happy, smiling genuinely, and never once complained to her audience about her difficult fate or mentioned the domestic violence she regularly endured. In 2019, Lamu's beloved grandmother passed away, and the blogger posted a video for the first time, where she was crying, expressing her deep pain over losing a family member. Her numerous followers sincerely supported her, unlike her husband, who instead of showing sympathy, became furious and struck her face because she was sobbing. In January 2020, after enduring another severe incident of violence, Lamu finally decided to leave her tyrannical husband. She took her sons, moved back to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lamu recorded a new video stating that for the first time in a long while, she felt calm and confident. In the video, it was evident she tried to cover up a large bruise under her eye with concealer. However, she never disclosed to anyone the domestic abuse she had suffered for years. Regrettably, during the divorce proceedings, the court divided custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with the mother and the older with the father. This decision was a devastating blow for Lamu, and her now ex-husband unexpectedly changed tactics by romantically pursuing her again, proposing they start over and not break up the family. He swore he had realized his mistakes, wanted them and the boys to live together again, and promised to acknowledge all his past errors and never repeat them. For a couple of months, Tong put on the act of a repentant man. He gave flowers, created real celebrations for the family, tried to help his ex-wife around the house, and even joined her on mountain trips, which he had never done before. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed that he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, the couple remarried. As you might guess, the fairy tale ended as soon as Lamu returned to her husband's house. Tong reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, and within 2 weeks of remarrying, he brutally attacked his wife, nearly beating her to death. When Lamu interacted with her followers, he snatched the phone from her hands and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he began to beat her with his fists and feet, giving her no chance to escape. Battered and barefoot, Lamu fled the house and immediately went to the police, seeking protection. But they only took her statement and advised her to try to resolve the family conflict on her own. After that, Lamu decided to hide from her husband in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Enraged, her husband was ready to end the life of his runaway wife, but did not know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house. He visited the sister's home and began yelling, demanding she tell him where Lamu was. The woman knew nothing about it and asked him to leave. Then, Tong repeatedly struck her in the face with all his might. At that moment, her husband was at work, so there was no one to protect the unfortunate woman. She suffered a fractured cheekbone and eye socket, and her nose was broken. After the second victim also filed a police report, Tong was finally held accountable administratively, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, Tong laid low while the second divorce proceedings were underway, not attempting to contact his wife. Unfortunately, this time around, the court, in dissolving the marriage, left both sons with the father, as the Lee family was wealthy, and money proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. Her close ones urged her to leave the village for a while, fearing the ex-husband would seek revenge and possibly do something dreadful. However, Lamu refused, wanting to be near her boys. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, where she recorded a video of herself singing and dancing. Apparently, this was her way of trying to relieve stress, but her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14, 2020, around 8, Lamu started a live stream to chat with her followers. She was dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. She put a finger to her lips, whispering that they needed to be quiet because her father and visiting stepbrother were already asleep while she prepared breakfast treats for them. At that moment, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. The blogger turned pale, frozen in fear, her eyes wide with horror. She stared at the person entering, then suddenly jumped up, clearly trying to escape. The tripod with her smartphone fell camera down, but the broadcast continued. Viewers could not see what was happening in the room, but could hear everything. Heavy footsteps were heard, followed by the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls. Lamu started screaming for help. Then her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell for a few seconds, then the click of a lighter followed by a piercing scream was heard. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room intensified. Followers were in disbelief, unwilling to accept that they had witnessed a tragedy, with some even speculating it was a cruel prank. Unfortunately, the worst had occurred. Tong decided to brutally exact revenge on his ex-wife for daring to leave him. He rode a motorcycle to Lamu's house, bringing along a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw his ex-wife in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door leading to the room. Tom caught Lamu off guard. She barely understood what was happening before she tried to flee, but he prevented her from escaping. Tom doused Lamu with fuel and wounded her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand what was happening or the seriousness of the situation. As the flames erupted, her relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams, burning like torches, collapsed, blocking the entrance. It took firefighters about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and in places literally melted and stuck to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing with a faint pulse detectable. She was immediately rushed to the hospital where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke, but she desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. Nevertheless, the city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering 1 million yen, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Then, Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers. He wrote a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. However, the family simply didn't have the funds for her medical treatment. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the needed care. Her condition was stabilized, and at one point it even seemed she might recover. However, tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, her heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. At the trial, Tong's mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Lee guilty of deliberate, cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death, additionally mandating his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tom attempted to appeal the verdict several times through appellate motions, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out. Tong Lee was executed that same year, 2 years after the tragic event that ended a young woman's life. Her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in. On the ground floor, her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents. The Lee family remained one of the wealthiest in the village, and the judges believed they could provide the children with better living conditions. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.